Hi, everybody. Welcome to the IC topic chat for today, August 8th. I know probably in 2008, so however many years ago that was the beginning of the Olympics in China. And we've been super excited in our household about watching the Olympics. And it just, I don't know, it just was a reminder today of how fun the Beijing Olympics were. And we're just having a great time with it. But that's not what we're here to talk about. That was just my little aside thinking, hey, it's August 8th. That's a lucky number in Asian cultures, by the way. But with that, today we're actually here to talk about hiring a virtual assistant, or I guess a VA. I was thinking hiring in Virginia when I first saw that, by the way, Kelly, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Hiring a virtual assistant with Kelly Feltault. Do you want to take over, Kelly?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Feltault of Cultural Crossings Consulting, and joining me today is my virtual assistant, Reed Yearwood. Reed, where are you?
Right here. Hey,
All
everybody.
right,
Thanks so much for having me.
great. So we're going to share our perspectives on hiring a VA today, assuming the computer's working. There we go. So this is going to be a very practical session about hiring a VA, including what to assign them, deciding on the skills you're looking for, how to let go of tasks.
And then we're also going to talk about kind of what I was responsible for coming in with the first 2 months, what that looks like compared to now, a year later. I've now been working with Kelly for a year and kind of just discuss some of those challenges and successes that we've had.
All right, so I've been a solopreneur off and on for over 10 years. I like being a solopreneur. I have no desire to have a firm. My clients are mostly government-funded projects, nonprofits, universities, and foundations. And in June of last year, I finished up a really big multi-year contract and was looking forward to taking a sabbatical that summer. It was a lovely dream. I had many things I wanted to do. Instead, there was an avalanche of opportunities in August. Two NSF grants that I was the external evaluator on were awarded. A former university client received a federal block grant to do an evaluation across their entire state. And they called me. And then another former client wanted a full evaluation with capacity building for their staff. Now, part of my values are that I try not to say no to former clients unless I am absolutely not qualified for the job. So in early August, I had a major panic attack and I realized I needed a whole bunch of subcontractors to do these projects. And then I would have to make contracts for them and I'd have to onboard them and I'd have to create all these onboarding materials and I'd have to manage all the invoicing, and the list of things to do just snowballed into a crazy list of tasks that needed to happen that would take me away from the work I love to do and that I needed to be doing, and also would really impact my well-being. So this was my first lesson in hiring a VA. Don't be a superhero. You cannot do everything, and you need to hire the VA before you need the VA. Okay. Now, a reminder, you guys know the drill. Only you can decide when you hire a VA, right? Thank you, Becky. But if you are currently working nights and weekends and you want your life back, if you are spending more time on admin work than the deep work that we need to do, if you have or want to get big projects that need subcontractors, and if you know you have gaps in your skills like building SharePoint sites, building websites, marketing campaigns, what I call those high-tech admin work and skills, you might need the VA now. So once I reset the panic button, I realized, these TIG sessions had mentioned hiring VAs often, but they didn't really talk about what to assign a VA or how to figure out what they're going to do, how to work with them, or any of the really practical stuff. So I did some Googling and YouTubing and found a great YouTube video that broke the hiring process down into a VA wish list And then the first 2 months, what do you want them to do the first 2 months? And so this is a summary of my VA wish list. In reality, that list of things I should not be doing was incredibly long. I think when I was making this presentation, I think I counted 46 entries on it. And many of them had been on my to-do list for over a year. So I sent this wish list to several VA companies and met with them to discuss the list and prices and policies. And then I selected a company who matched me with Reed based on this wish list and my answers to their matching survey. And then I turned this wish list into an orientation packet and manual of me, basically. It included information about my business, my values, my expectations for work and working together, my preferences for communication and meetings, how I manage my email, how I tend to schedule things and when I tend to schedule meetings, the current systems that I was using, the needs that I had for possibly new systems, and how I tend to work with clients. It also included a section on my SOPs, which I'll be honest, they were not written down anywhere except in this orientation packet. And they were very sort of minimal and just kind of outlined. In the expectations section, I talked about the communities I tend to work with, and I explained the approaches that I use, and try to make sure my practice and processes incorporate DEI and trauma-informed best practices. And I really wanted the VA to be familiar with this and the idea of systemic racism, sexism, and other forms of systemic violence. It tends to be something my work focuses on. Other expectations were more practical and really reflected how I tend to work. So being proactive and raising or solving problems ahead of time. Having a process is important to me. Being a sounding board, right, for different ideas and processes. And also just having fun, being compassionate, and being authentic. So the orientation packet also included a list of priorities for the first 2 months.
So these were the main priorities that Kelly outlined in her orientation packet, right? So if we go through them, looking at like SOPs, learning these systems, but also, working with Kelly to improve those systems, being able to build out an Asana page or a SharePoint website for specific projects, helping Kelly with research for different platforms that she wanted to implement within her business model, jumping in and starting to handle some of that email marketing and management, which I can now admit after years, definitely not my strong suit, but that was definitely something that Kelly needed some assistance with. And then, taking over things like onboarding subcontractors and invoicing, things like that. So that's kind of where we started in month 2, or in month 1 and 2. We met weekly. We slowly started to work on these things and iron out any, issues to improve these systems. And that was kind of the first 2 months. If we flash forward to now, 12 months later, I still do a lot of this work, but it's really all streamlined. So we're like, onboarding a subcontractor, all Kelly needs to do is like, here you go, onboard the subcontractor. There's no more discussion that's really needed. When it comes to invoicing, Kelly knows that all invoices are going to go out. So, building a SharePoint site, I've got this new project. I need a SharePoint site. This is what I need. That can be built. So we've done all of that. We've streamlined all of these, but then we've also been able to get into some things that Kelly had. And I think she mentioned this in the beginning, she had things on her wish list that were, a year, 18 months, 2 years old that she had as long-term goals. And we're getting into those now, specifically when it comes to like marketing, starting to grow her social media presence, sending out newsletters and creating marketing campaigns. So we've moved past kind of this stage and we're starting to get into some things that she had, on her wish list for down the road. So one thing that I would recommend to anybody considering a VA, and I think this has been a tremendous experience for me professionally, and I think one day I'll be on the other side where I will be on the hiring a VA side of this. I would definitely focus on the match portion of it. Everybody has different work styles. Everybody has different personalities. And I think that plays a role in the success and impact that the VA can have for somebody. When it comes to Kelly and I, we both have very similar personalities. We're very detail oriented and task driven, very organized, focus on tasks that are in front of us. We're both kind of I'd say straight shooters. We don't necessarily take work criticism very, we're not sensitive to work criticism. If we're like, hey, this is terrible, fix it, right? That's kind of how I like to hear things, and Kelly's the exact same way. A little bit about my background. Before being a VA, I was the executive director of a nonprofit organization for 5 years. We helped and served the Latino, Hispanic, and immigrant community of the greater Cincinnati area. I'm now getting my master's degree in accounting. So that's kind of, my professional background. But one thing that I would, recommend definitely is making sure that match lines up, both work-wise, background-wise, professionally. I think that is a crucial factor in the success of the VA. So, these are some of the challenges that I think, we faced some of these, but I think a lot of people, currently I have 5 clients that are strictly VA, and then I also have some clients that are bookkeeping clients. But these are kind of the main challenges that I think, and I think that first one really is across the board, right? It's like letting go, being able to say like, you do this, right? Everybody kind of goes about that in a different way. I know when I was the executive director, I wanted to do absolutely everything, and I did a terrible job of delegating. And I think a lot of people can run into that same thing when it comes to, being like, hey, here's access to my inbox. You can respond to, an email if it's about this project, or, here's the invoice schedule, make sure to send these out. So, being able to let go of things, I think people have a difficult time doing. And then one thing that I would really recommend is when it comes to instructions, like, a lot of times we've worked with specific tasks or had specific responsibilities for so long, it might sound clear to us, but in reality, if somebody's doing something for a first time, it makes absolutely no sense. So when delegating tasks, it's really important to break that down. And then also understand, right? Like, for example, I write a lot of, or help Kelly with a lot of SOWs with her scopes of work, right? For her to think on time, the very first time she's going to hand me it and I'm going to send it back perfectly done for her to send out to the client or to a subcontractor, I don't think that's a very realistic expectation. So it's kind of like going back and forth and improving every time until that VA has, really mastered some of those tasks and can just kind of run with them without a whole lot of micromanagement. I think those are, kind of what I've experienced as challenges when it comes to both, working with Kelly and then some others.
Yeah, and I would say as a solopreneur, you often have a shorthand in your head of how to do something or what you need done, but it just doesn't translate to other people. And you have to keep that in mind and bring out the longhand of that, right? And then also, even sometimes the longhand doesn't translate to other people. So you really need to think about how clear you're being in your instructions. And I think too, that's where those SOPs come in handy, particularly for repeated tasks like invoicing and onboarding the subcontractors and that kind of stuff. And, we wrote the SOPs, or Reed wrote the SOPs, and then we had to onboard some subcontractors immediately. And we were able to kind of finesse those based on, the first 2 or 3 that we onboarded. And now it is literally like he said, like, oh, we need to onboard this person. Here's, go do that. And now that's completely his wheelhouse at this point. And it's great. Drafts definitely are a time saver. I mean, just take this, copy and paste, those are the kinds of instructions I'll do for just a draft. If it's a contract or something, we have a template, and then just, make a couple of updates to it. And then the scope of work, same. If it's just a draft, I can at least go in and work on the draft, like edit the draft and finesse it, finalize it. It's still a time saver. So I still find it really helpful. So some of our successes, they've been in several areas. Of course, we now have processes that are working. And as Reed mentioned, we've made my marketing ideas a reality this summer. I'm able to say yes to some really big, interesting projects and to past clients still. And I still have brain space and free time. And really, my biggest metric for this is that in December of last year, I spent the whole month in Germany visiting friends and going to Christmas markets. And this is the Christmas market in Leipzig. So, for me, it has been literally a lifesaver, but also able to take my business to a new level. Yeah. And our last evidence of success at the end of, well, I guess in January of this year, Asana sent me an end of year report, which I thought was interesting. And so although I hired Reed at the end of August last year, I completed 27% of all tasks I did last year with Reed, which to me was like, okay, yes, we are getting some things done that I had not been able to move. And I was still able to go to Germany for a month. So we are happy to answer any questions that you guys have. And thank you.
And before we go to the chat portion where I stopped the recording, there's a bunch of questions in the meeting chat. Now, you're also going to find a lot of commentary on whether we should have Smokey the Bear as our mascot. So you might have to skip over all those because that became a whole subtopic. We should almost have different chat boxes for different conversations. I guess some of the questions that I was glad to see were, how much time does Reed work with you per month or per week, and how do you set those things up? And certainly Reed has to have some level of expectation. My biggest question is, how do you budget for this, and how do you think about the costs associated with it?
That's a great question. So when I selected the 3 VA companies and sent them my VA wish list, part of the conversation I had with them were, what are your prices? And so prices are attached to hours. And I see some people have asked me which company I picked. So I went with Peachtree, not a sponsor. I know many of you have used Peachtree. I thought their matching process, the hours, and the price met my needs. So Reed works for me 25 hours a month. And to your question, Matt, it was, there's no way you can't afford it, right, at that point. So, you have contracts coming in, you can't do all of it. And then you start budgeting into those contracts for the VA. So that is something I do now, is I put Reed's time into all budget proposals that I send out. So it's covered. There were maybe 1 or 2 contracts where it wasn't covered because I'd already signed those before I hired him, but there was no way I could go forward with anything without some help. So, figure out what your budget is and what you can afford based on the contracts that you have or that you are about to get, and, see what you can do.
So question for Reed, how many clients do you have like Kelly? Or do you only have Kelly as your one client? How does that operate for you?
So I have another client that's also 25 hours. That's very similar. It's operations, SOPs, doing a lot of that. And then I have another client that's 100 hours a month, and that's a museum, and it's strictly grant writing and development. And then I've got 3 other clients through Peachtree that are all bookkeeping. And then I've also got, 2 or 3 clients that I work with outside of Peachtree that I worked with before I started to work for Peachtree. So, I think when it comes to everything I do, it's directly related to my background as an executive director of a nonprofit. It's either grant writing and development or like operations, bookkeeping. So, things that I did not need to learn before I took the position, which was something that interested me about being a VA while I get my master's.
I have some more questions for Reed and Allison and whoever the IC TIG person is. I see your hands are up. I'm gonna get to you as soon as we stop the recording. I just want to give you guys I want to recognize your hands are up, and we'll definitely get to you. So Reed, clearly you're in a similar situation as you are. If you know anything about what this group and why Kelly joins the IC topic chat, the IC TIG, which stands for Independent Consulting Topical Interest Group. So we're folks who are basically solopreneurs who most of us have multiple clients that we support. So we're similar in that way. How do you balance the workload, and how do you make sure and communicate with Kelly, hey, I'm really busy right now, I can't get to that, even though she has an expectation, or you just work long hours? How do you manage your workload? And then importantly, on the other side of that, the second question, I know this is double barreled, is what are the things you don't do? What are lines that you don't cross? What are things that are just too much? And how do you determine that?
Yeah, I think the last question is difficult. I'm not even sure if I have a, let me think about it. So I'll answer the first one.
I'm assuming nobody's asked you to do anything inappropriate. So
yeah, no, definitely not. When it comes to managing, I enjoy it. I like having a little bit of, not chaos, but like I like to work with different people on different things and have different clients. And I also did some like social media marketing for a time. So I had one client where I was running ads. So I like to write a grant, then do operations, then do bookkeeping. Then I enjoy it. It breaks up my day, and it's not like the same thing every single day. I also really value working at home and working remotely and not having to go into an office. But when it comes to organization, I just make sure everything is mapped out, right? The last 30 minutes of my day are planning the next day, like to a T, and then also looking at a couple days down the road. So, before, when I sit down at 6:30, I know everything that I'm going to do. Like, of course, there's going to be things that jump up and you have to kind of organize. But, one thing that with that's good with Kelly, and I saw somebody in the chat ask if I'm a 1099 subcontractor, and the answer is yes. So the VAs are 1099 subcontractors. It's very rare that Kelly asks me to do something urgently. I would say, like, if anything, it might be like 24 hours, right? That might be like the most urgent task. So if that's the case, there's nothing that's going to come up and like make me 100% move to something else. I would say that the most difficult thing is having 11 email addresses. So it's important that they all go to one calendar. That's definitely important. And then working with people in 4 time zones can get a little confusing. But that stuff I think is, you can put systems in to automate all of that.
And just to show you guys like how well we are matched, I do the exact same thing. The last 30 minutes of my day is planning the next day and the next day, at least 3 days in advance. And, I don't like doing things last minute. I don't like rush jobs. You pay extra for rush jobs here because there's usually a mistake that's made and I just don't like doing it. And, the processes that Reed described, I mean, we work very similarly. So, I mean, it has definitely worked out. And I also, as the person bringing the VA on, I talked about my values and, I'm doing this to get some brain space, but that doesn't mean that, we're heaping work onto the VA, right? It's, let's be clear about what he's going to do and what I'm going to do. And that's where that wish list really is helpful, because everything that was in the I should not be doing this list is now on Reed's list, right? And it is a lot of invoicing and bringing the subcontractors on board. And I see somebody asked, like, how do you do that? Well, first of all, we created the SOPs and sort of walked through a process that we wanted them to go through. And, so the first thing is we identify who the subcontractors are. I do an interview with them. If I'm going to bring them on board, then I let Reed know. And he uses the SOPs to go through, but he's also the one who builds the SharePoint site, which is the space that we're going to collaborate in with the subcontractors, and it's the project site. He then adds them to Asana, which is my project management software, and starts assigning them tasks based on the scope of work. He does an onboarding meeting with them and walks them through all of our systems and processes and the invoicing and all this kind of stuff. He gets them set up in Gusto, which is our invoicing and payment system, which I will say I did not have until I got Reed. So, and then he also sends everything out to be signed through a DocuSign. Again, I did not have that until Reed came on board because I just didn't have the time to, like, I'd done all the research, but I didn't have the time to pick one and, fill out all the whatever. So, I just, somebody else take care of that so that I can focus on the deep work. So yeah, it's, I'm trying to see if there's any other questions here.
Well,
What other
plenty.
companies? Yeah, what other companies did I contact? I can't remember. I would have to go back and look. But there were 3. And one of them was actually based in the UK. And I realized that was not going to work.
Okay, so we're gonna pause on this for a second. In a second, I'm gonna stop the recording. But before I do that, Kelly, since I have you here, I want to ask you what I call my James Lipton questions. I'm not sure if I've done it before, or and Reed, you're welcome to jump in on this too. So if you've been around with the IC topic chat for a while, the James Lipton questions are questions inspired by James Lipton, who had a show called Inside the Actor Studio, where he'd bring on actors and he'd ask them questions about, what are their favorite curse words, which you don't need to answer that one. That's not one of the questions, but things along those lines. And it was the same questions he asked of all of his guests. And so I like to do that when we have guest hosts. So Kelly, if you had to start all over again and you didn't have your current network of clients and colleagues, how would you get started with a consulting practice? And this is a question for those people who are just getting started thinking, what am I doing? How am I supposed to get started? I know how to do evaluation, but I don't have any business. How do I get started? So how would you start if you had to start all over?
I would start, I think, the way that I did start. I think it worked for me. So I went to work for the federal government as an evaluator. And I got a lot of experience doing a variety of types of evaluations with different communities for different purposes. And I worked in international development. So it was a really wide variety of communities. And then when I decided to become an independent consultant, I contacted some colleagues from the feds. See, this is another thing. You work for the feds, you build a network. Contacted some colleagues from the feds who had independent consulting businesses and said, do you need subcontractor to do the work? And several of them did. And so I worked for them first as a subcontractor and really got to know, how do you run an independent consulting business? And 2 of them are still my mentors. And I've just learned a great deal from them. And then, of course, I joined the TIG during the pandemic, and you all became fabulous mentors as well. So that, and I also think there are some innate skills and some drive that has to be in you for being an independent consultant. It's your name on stuff. And so you really need to make sure that it is high quality and have the drive to do that, even if it means like, oh, I need to work till 9 o'clock tonight or whatever to get it done. So, that kind of, I don't need a boss. Like I am probably harder on me than any boss would be. Right. So, I think that's, some personal skills. And then also, I think go work someplace where you're an evaluator for an organization or an institution first, and then become an independent consultant.
Reed, did you have any reflections? I know you don't know anything about the evaluation world, but
Yeah, unfortunately, Matt, I think these questions might be best suited for
might be
Kelly. I have
specific for her. Yeah,
absolutely no clue how to build a consulting business.
All righty. Kelly, is now a good time to start an independent consulting practice?
I think so. Again, I'm still very connected to the federal evaluation world, and given the policies that have happened over the last couple of years and the heavy focus on evaluation that is happening, and the funding that's coming behind it and the requirements and requests, and it's all trickling down to grantees and to projects. Yes, whether you want to be an evaluator with the feds or an independent consultant providing those evaluation services, I think this is a great time to be an independent consultant and just to be an evaluator.
Well, thank you very much, Kelly, for this session today. For everybody who's here live, stick around. I'm going to stop the recording. For everybody who's on YouTube, we'll see you next week.